African Americans in particular who say, why is history important? What has that got to do with me? Why should I study the past? All right. Now let's talk about some of the historians, and I understand that not too many people like me come to Denmark and give these presentations. So I want to talk about some of my predecessors and some of the people who influenced me, and just some of our great scholars and historians that you may or may not know. This man right here, his name is John Henry Clark. And he used to say Pan-Africanism or perish. You know, I knew him personally. And then right here is a man named Chancellor Williams. He wrote a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. Very, very important book, because that book, perhaps more than any other book, attempts to address the question, what happened to us? If African people built the pyramids, if we did all of these wonderful things, and I'm going to talk about in the course of this presentation, what happened? How do we lose it all? Not only to the point where a lot of us don't know we ever did anything, but some of us don't care. So what happened? And he attempted to address that. He's also a person that I read at a very critical age in my life. I was a university freshman. I read this book, Destruction of Black Civilization, which I highly recommend even now. And here was a person who said that Africans had a history, the first person I read, that Africans had a history before enslavement, and that Africans traveled all over the ancient world in ancient times. That was a revelation to me. And I knew from that point, I think I was 18 at the time, that I wanted to be a historian. And then the brother standing up, all of them are ancestors now. His name is Joseph Ben Jacquemin, and he was a great Egyptologist. He actually took people to Egypt so you could see it for yourself. You know Egypt is in Africa, right? I just wanted to make sure we understand it. So if you're just watching on TV, you think Africa is, Egypt is in the Middle East, wherever that is. That's a geopolitical expression. Egypt is in Africa. It's always been in Africa. I've been in Egypt 22 times, and it's been in Africa every time. Real quickly, brother, yes?
Did they have anything to do with Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
See if you can hold your questions. That's a good question.
Yep.
Not only that, but he also talked about the African roots of other major religions. Christianity, Islam, Judaism in particular. And then the light-skinned brother, because in the United States we have what is called the one-drop rule. These words like dual heritage, metis, biracial, those are new words for us. None of us really talked about that until Tiger Woods. Up to that point, if you had any African heritage, don't matter if you had a white parent, if you had any African heritage, you were a member of the club. So his name is John G. Jackson, and he wrote books like Man, God, and Civilization, Ages of Gold and Silver, Was Jesus Christ a Negro, The African Origins of the Garden of Eden, and these were the brothers who really influenced me. And then here's some others. A man named Dr. Asa Hilliard, a great educator, one of our greatest scholars, all their ancestors now. You brought him up, Sheikh Anta Diop, the great African scholar from Senegal, perhaps the greatest of them all, who showed maybe more than anybody in history that the ancient Egyptians, the people who built the pyramids, were in fact African people. And I guess we have to have that discussion now because people are still wondering who were these pyramid builders. Yeah, it's funny. And let's not leave the sisters out. I'm very, very big on praising black women. I love black women, and I don't apologize for that. As an African man, I love to sing the praises of African women. You all are the best. There are none like you. You are the mothers of civilization, the mothers of humanity. And there's nothing I could say as a black man that would do you the justice that you deserve. And I will never bite my tongue or apologize for that. I think that we as a people have a tendency to want to make other people comfortable at our own expense. So we will stifle our tongues, we will watch what we say because we don't want to make somebody else mad. We don't want to offend anybody. I'm not like that. So if you got a problem with that, that's your problem. This is a great African-American historian named Drusilla Dungy Houston, who in 1926 wrote a book called The Wonderful Ethiopians in the Ancient Kushite Empire. Now, I do want to say one point about this, and this is very important. Loving yourself doesn't mean hating other people. I think a lot of people feel like if you are in love with black folk, you must automatically hate other people. Now, how that comes about, I don't know. There is an African proverb that's perhaps appropriate, and I throw these proverbs out quite frequently, and that is, those who have done evil expect evil.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Those who have done evil expect evil. Now, when I say I love black people, that doesn't mean I hate anybody else. The person I come closest to hating right now is Donald Trump. Okay? But beyond that, we're good.
I knew that was coming.
And this is Antonio Furman. This is a great African scholar and historian from Haiti. He's been called the Sheikh Anta Diop of Haiti. And this is another brother from Jamaica that I'm often compared to. I take great pride in that. His name is Joel Augustus Rogers, J.A. Rogers. When I heard that Rogers had gone to 60 countries, I made up my mind that I was going to go to 65. And now I'm thinking of 120, maybe 140. Okay? He wrote and published a lot of his own works, and he wrote for what's called the Negro Press. In a way, I'm kind of like that. I spend a lot of time on Facebook. I think of myself as the Pharaoh of Facebook. Everybody should be a Pharaoh or something. Facebook is my domain, because that's where people who I think need the information the most are. The people who need this information the most are not the people at the universities. It's the average, and I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's the everyday person that needs the information. Rogers. And here's a brother from a place in the Caribbean called Dominica. His name is Edward Scobie. He was probably the world's leading authority on the African presence in Europe. A brother from Brazil named Abdias do Nascimento, the great African historian from Brazil. He lived to be in his middle 90s. And I was able to meet him not long before he passed away. Great African scholar, very distinguished looking. There's something about a brother with a lot of white hair that makes him look distinguished. Of course, I'm not biased or prejudiced or anything like that. I'm just saying. Okay. And another brother who was, in fact, I had that same shirt on. Isn't that a coincidence today? That's my shirt. I got this from Bunwiri near Kumasi in Ghana. This is a man named Jan Peru from Guyana, who was a mentor, probably the person I was closest to, a man named Ivan Van Sertima. Just a few pictures with me, with some of these great men. With Joseph Ben Yakinen, this is one of my favorite pictures right here, the great Egyptologist. And with a man named John Henry Clark. I was young at that time. I was introducing him, great, great, great scholar, and a great person. And with the brother I was showing you a little while ago, the light-skinned brother, John G. Jackson. And probably my closest relationship in terms of a historical mentor, the great Ivan Van Sertima, who is the leading authority in the world on the African presence in pre-Columbian America, and also the founder of a publication called the Journal of African Civilization. This was a long time ago. And then, I don't know, my French is not very good, but you can see Sheikh Anta Diop here working in his laboratory. Diop was not only a scholar, he was a Pan-Africanist, and he established the first radiocarbon laboratory in sub-Saharan Africa. And he was a great Pan-Africanist. He believed that Africa must and should unite. My latest book, I do have a couple copies here for sale, Uncovering the African Past, the Ivan Van Sertima Papers. Now let's look briefly at the geography of Africa. I think a lot of people, especially in the United States, do not realize just how big Africa is. But you can see the United States can fit in Africa comfortably several times. And then you can, is another example as to the immensity of Africa. You could put the US, China, and I don't think China's that big. It's mighty big there. India, UK, Japan, Eastern Europe, Italy, Switzerland. You could probably put Denmark in there somewhere. Portugal, Spain, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and still have some room. So Africa's a huge place. And then we can see how Africa was divided up. And it still suffers from these divisions. I was talking to one of my sisters here. She's from Somalia, and I was asking her, are you from British Somalia or Italian Somalia? And she pointed out that Somalia has been divided by the French, the British, the Italians. I'm leaving somebody out. And now, I guess French Somalia is now Djibouti. That's just one example. But you can see that the French got a lot. And the British weren't cheated. That's for sure. The Germans were colonizers in Africa. A lot of people forget that. Who else we're talking about? The Portuguese. They got Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde. The Italians got a nice little piece. And the country I'm leaving out is Belgium, because at one point, prior to the time of this map, the Congo, what is now Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I suppose that might include Burundi and Rwanda too, I'm not sure, but much of Central Africa was the private property of one person, King Leopold II, who did terrible, terrible things in Africa. So Africa has been divided up, and then the resources of Africa. Now, when we think of Africa, most of us think, when I say most of us, I typically, when I do an international presentation, I didn't think to do it today because it wasn't really necessary. I ask people, what do you think of when you think of Africa? And I get a lot of answers, but three always. Poverty. Disease. You remember just a couple of years ago, we were all going to die from Ebola. We were all going to die. The world was coming to the end. Armageddon was at our door. Now you don't even hear people talking about it anymore. And the other thing, well, see, poverty, disease, wild animals. Because that's what you see on TV. And that's the general perception that many people have. So when I've been to Africa, I don't know, maybe 100 times. I've been fortunate to have visited 32 countries in Africa, every region. And when I come back from Africa, I'm going in a couple months again. And then I'm going back again a couple months after that. People ask me in the United States, Runoko, where did you stay? Did you stay in a hotel? Do they have hotels in Africa? Were you able to use the telephone? I know you didn't get the internet. Did you see any wild animals? Did the lions chase you? Abysmal ignorance of Africa. Now, when I come back from Australia, people don't ask me, did the kangaroos chase you? If I go to Russia, people don't say, did you, anyway. I'm saying there's a general perception of Africa that many people of African heritage have, and it's an overwhelmingly negative one. And so it's not unusual for a person in the United States like me to say, thank God for slavery, because at least it got us out of Africa. What more negative or hateful things could you possibly say? So we have a lot of work to do, and that's my job. Now look at just some of the resources: oil, gas, what I call blood diamonds, uranium, copper, manganese, iron ore, gold, just to name a few. Now, if this was an updated map, we put coltan on there. Okay. So Africa is not poor, Africans are poor. Africa is not poor, Africa is being looted. Africa is being raped. The vast mineral resources of Africa are taken out of Africa to benefit other people. All right. Now, so I start to deconstruct that. I start to say, well, do you know, Africa is where the first people came from. Africa is where people first domesticated fire. Africa is where people first had a house, not a hut, a house. Africa is where people first built a boat and sailed on the river. Africa is where people first had mathematics. Africa is where people first had art. Africa is where people first buried the dead. Africa is where people first played music. Africa is where people first wore clothes, wore shoes, charted the stars in the heavens, had philosophy and morality and religion, built the first cities. So why should I be ashamed of Africa? And your attitude begins to change. You begin to see yourself in a different light. This is particularly important for people who were taken away as a result of enslavement, because we have been taught to hate Africa. Malcolm X used to say, if you hate the roots of a tree, you can't help hating the tree itself. And so what these presentations tend to do is to build bridges, because I think we need Africa, and I think Africa needs us. But as long as there's this divide, Africans on the continent say, I'm not an African. Those are fighting words. Now, it used to be, if you had called me an African, we were going to fight. Now, if you say, I'm not an African, we have a problem. Because to me, being an African is the greatest thing I could possibly be. I'm so proud of that. But I had to become possessed of knowledge of self. It transformed everything. Here's an example, an African from a country called Ethiopia, with the bones of a woman called Digness. The world knows these bones as Lucy. They are 3.4 million years old, one of our earliest identifiable ancestor, not even human yet, Australopithecus. When I ask people, what do you think of when you think of Africa, nobody says the birthplace of science. This is a paleontologist. And then they have early mathematics in Africa. This is called the Ishango bone. It's 25,000 years old. It's from Congo Kinshasa, or Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zaire. And this bone is now in a museum, in the Natural History Museum in Brussels, Belgium. I'm told there's a bunch of them there. They may be as much as 90,000 years old. And then, of course, the world's first large stone building is in Africa, not Denmark. And this is called the Step Pyramid. It's almost 5,000 years old. It's not only the first pyramid, it's the first large stone building in the world. And this is the man who designed it. His name is Imhotep. Now, a lot of people have heard of Imhotep, but the Imhotep you've heard of is in the Mummy movies. Yeah. He's a bad guy. The real Imhotep is the Prince of Peace. He's also known as the father of medicine, long before Hippocrates, the original hypocrite. He gave us an expression that sounds quintessentially African to me, and that is, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. Don't that sound like something a brother would say? He is an astronomer, a magician, a dentist. He's the prime minister of the country. He's a writer. But looking at him, it's hard to tell, at least this is such a small statue, his African characteristics. So, this is his mother. Now, do I even need to go on? I could stop right now. Look, that's the mother of Imhotep. Her name is Prodonk. Look at that happy to be nappy hair. That's what I call it, happy to be nappy. And the African features. These are the things, it seems to me, that we should be teaching in our schools. Now, chances are they're not going to teach it to you here. But we need to take every opportunity to educate ourselves about ourselves. And then, of course, that step pyramid gave way to these architectural wonders, which have been called miracles in stone. Not built by enslaved people at all, built by free Africans as a national construction project. The stone itself came from about 500 miles away. I guess that's about 800 kilometers. So let's suppose we're going to build something like this here, but we'd have to go to, so what's a good example? Paris, to get the building material, and then dig it out of the quarry and put it on a barge and sail it down the Nile to the construction project, or the construction site. This one in the background is called the Great Pyramid. It's the biggest of them. And it's composed of approximately 5,000 blocks. Is it 5,000? I'm a little lost here. Maybe it's a lot of blocks. Thousands of stuff. I haven't done this presentation in a while. I've got to go back and review. But the thing is, the stones were not cemented together. The stones were cut so precisely that they were fitted together like you fit the pieces of a puzzle. Right? When it was finished, it was covered with limestone. And the limestone was polished and buffed. And they shined it until it gleamed like a diamond. Imagine that. A cloudless sky. And the visual effect that this would have when the sun came out. All right. And then these are built by 3 generations of African kings. A man named Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. All right. Here's the second big one on the Giza Plateau. You can see some of the limestone still at the top. And at the bottom is the monument that we call the Great Sphinx, or Horamaket, is the African name. But I think that this is the image that most of us have. This is the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. A white Sphinx, blue eyes, and a white king in front of it. Images are very powerful. That's why we really wanted to show you pictures. Because imagery is very, very, very powerful. And I think that this is the image that most of us have of Egypt today. You just look at all the movies that come out in Egypt. Some of them don't even have Africans as slaves in these movies now.
Gods of Egypt.
Yeah, abomination. And this one I just put in here to show you, or to disprove the idea that Napoleon blew off the face of this monument I think a lot of people go around talking about that. That's a myth. Napoleon comes to Egypt in 1798. This drawing was done in 1737. So I think it was damaged hundreds of years ago. All right. And let's just show some images from the Nile Valley. This, of course, is part of the monument at a place called Abu Simbel. These are statues of Ramses the Great. You can see a comparison here between Mount Rushmore in the United States, 4 American presidents, and compare that to the 4 statues of Ramses the Great built thousands of years before. And you can see the Washington Monument here, and then look at this Tekken or obelisk from Kemet 3,000 some years ago. You can see the Washington Monument here and this reflection pool, and compare it to Karnak Temple and the Sacred Lake thousands of years ago. You can see a statue here of Martin Luther King Jr. and Tutankhamun. I call this a king and a king.
Yes, sir.
You can see Bruce Lee here. Now, why on earth would I put Bruce Lee in here? Because Africans were practicing martial arts in the Valley of the Nile thousands of years before Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. You can see the Oscar here. I just want to show how Africa has influenced popular culture right now. You can see the Oscar or the Academy Award in the United States and the 2 images of male aspects of God in ancient Egypt. Let's look at some comparisons here. You have the brother from Ethiopia in a Romo compared with Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Look at that Afro. If my hair still grew, that's how I'll be wearing it today. Maybe I'd have locks even better. Look at this right here. Here's an image of Asar, also known as Osiris. Just other images, I'll just go through these quickly. Now, how can we have any doubt, really, that ancient Egypt was African? That's because modern Egyptology begins in the time of enslavement. And so Egypt, in a sense, has moved out of Africa into what we call the Near East or the Middle East. Here's a beautiful example of Pharaoh Akhenaten and the Maasai brother from Kenya. Another example, Ramses III and another brother from Kenya. Here's a mathematical papyrus from ancient Egypt. This is before Greece and Rome. Just an example of sisters braiding their hair. So there are cultural things too that you don't lose, you don't forget. They seem to be embedded. Now here's a good one. This is a prosthetic toe from ancient Egypt. Look at the color of the prosthetic. Now what does it say about the people that it was designed for? A black man and a black woman together. To me, that's a beautiful sight. I got deafening silence when I said that. Here's an image of the figure called Amun. Amun. It means the invisible one, the unseen one, the hidden one. That's where we get the expression in the churches in the United States, Amen. This is from Egypt 3,500 years ago. And now just look at some of the great personalities in ancient Egyptian history. And I'm using Egypt as an example. Of course, history in Africa is continent-wide. But we use Egypt because Egypt has been taken out of Africa in a sense. And so I think it's important to connect. And taking Egypt out of Africa is like taking Greece and Rome out of Europe. Here's the Pharaoh, the first known Pharaoh. His name is Narmer or Aha Mena. This is my favorite. In fact, this one is in the Carlsberg Glyptotek Museum. This is a man named Namare Amenemhet III. This is my favorite king of all time. I'm going to spend some time with him tomorrow. A brother named Nepheped-Ra Mentuhotep II. This is in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. And a man and a woman together. Now, why the difference in the color? It has nothing to do with ethnicity. In ancient Egypt, black was considered the color of divinity. It was considered the holy color. And so when you see a person painted black, you know they were particularly special because the people themselves were black. They were African. But this woman, her name is Amos Nefertari, and she was super special. This woman, her name is Queen Tai. This is in a museum in Berlin. I just left Germany yesterday. And this is a beautiful little wooden head. It's 3,400 years old. Now, how were they able to preserve it like this so that it essentially looks brand new? She is the wife of a king named Amenhotep III. She's the mother of a king named Akhenaten. She's the mother-in-law of Nefertiti, and she's the grandmother of King Tut or Tutankhamun. And she looks very, very, very serious. Don't mess with her. Her son Akhenaten, who is credited with having written the Book of Psalms by some people, he is a monotheist. He reigned for 19 years. This is the husband of Nefertiti. He's the first man that we know of nonviolence in the world. The king named Ramses the Great. Tutankhamun. Here's a king named Taharqa from the 25th dynasty, who was actually not from Egypt itself. He came from a place called Kush. Just a brother and a sister together. I like as much of that as I can see is what I want to see. And don't they look tender? You don't see this in the art of Greece and Rome. You either see a man by himself or a woman by herself. In fact, the Greeks seem to think that there was something wrong with a man and a woman being together. Plato believed that a romantic relationship between a man and a woman was a form of insanity. Yeah, so people talk about platonic relationships. Watch what you're talking about. Plato seemed to think that the ideal relationship was between an older man and a young boy, not a man and a woman. Africans said, you must be crazy. From the kingdom of Kush. And these are some of the people who undoubtedly, this is what the people actually look like. Let's spend some time in Sudan. Is anybody from Sudan? South Sudan? All right. Let's look at some of these beautiful people. In the United States, we use the expression, and that is black don't crack. Anuba's sister from Sudan. And another sister from Sudan. And here I am in South Sudan. I gave a presentation at the University of Juba several years ago, and I never quite hit my stride that night. So later on, these brothers came up to me and said, Dr. Rashidi, something seems to be troubling you. And I said, yeah, it is. And they said, what? And I said, I'm jealous, I'm envious. They said, of what? I said, of you. I want to look like you, I want to be black like you. And they said, well, come to stay for about 1,000 years, and you will look just like us. From Sudan. And from Somalia. Now, just to show briefly that history, African history, is not confined to the Valley of the Nile. This is one of Sister Sarah's favorite people. This is Mansa Kankan Musa, who was Sultan of the Mali Empire about 800 years ago, according to economists, the wealthiest man that ever lived. And he was a patron of architects. He helped finance this structure, a patron of the arts and writing. So you may have heard of the Timbuktu manuscripts. And you had similar manuscripts in the neighboring countries. Here I am with what I call the Niger manuscripts, hundreds of years old. And then a little bitty picture, sorry about that. This is from North Africa. This may be the African figure named Hannibal. Not Hannibal Barca, not Hannibal in the Silence of the Lambs, not Hannibal Lecter, but the original Hannibal. And then, of course, this takes us to Nigeria. Nigerians love to, they used to tell me, Runoko, you've been all over Africa, but have you been to Nigeria? And at the time, I hadn't been. They said, well, you really haven't been to Africa. So I made it a point to go to Nigeria 3 times, okay? And this is from the civilization called Nok, N-O-K. And of course, from South Central Africa, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. This is from South Central Africa. These are the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. And then what happened? How did we lose it? What happened to us? Of course, you have the invasion of Africa. You have the pillage of Africa. This is from Nigeria. These are British soldiers after the sack of a place called Benin. Some of these artifacts in the British Museum in London right now. And the Arabs are not immune. This is a slave quarters in Tunisia, a place called Kebele. Africans were marched from as far away as Mali and Senegal to be taken to southern Tunisia, where they were eventually sold. And this is from Ghana. I believe this is Cape Coast Dungeon. Some of my very ancestors may have been locked up there. I never say slaves came from Africa. I say Africans were captured and enslaved. I don't come from slaves. Don't come to me with that. Because we're stigmatized with that. All people have been enslaved at one time or another. And then here's a place in Ghana where the captured Africans were able to take a last bath. They were captured in the interior, marched to the coast, and here they were able to take a last bath